Welcome back to the channel, and welcome to Rupert Lowe MP of Great Yarmouth, but quickly becoming a voice of the nation, not just of Great Yarmouth. Rupert, welcome.
Hello, Daniel. I'm honoured to be on your show.
Very happy to have you here. So I thought I'd invite you on, and I'm very pleased you've come on. Just have a bit of a talk about various different things. There's obviously a lot going on. Let's start with voting and who votes and who doesn't vote. So 80% of those that could have voted did not vote for Labour, which is who we've now got. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think people are disaffected with what I call the uni party, which is basically Labour and the Tories, who have progressively let down the British electorate over quite a long period of time. So if you take, the last sensible Prime Minister I think we had was probably Maggie Thatcher, who left Britain in very rude health. She basically believed in hard work, enterprise. She believed in a culture of aspiration. She basically believed in a lot of the things that I believe in that basically make life better for a country. John Major, I think, was a bit of an irrelevance. Then we ended up with the malign Tony Blair, Gordon Brown, Campbell and Mandelson, with Derry Irvine legally advising them. And they actually did more damage than almost anybody else. They laid the heffalump traps for mass immigration. They also passed the Equalities Act, which, again, I think has been very damaging to British society. But then the Tories, under, first of all, coalition with Clegg and Cameron, then we had Cameron alone, then we had May, then we had Boris, who was an abject failure. I think the public have got rather bored of this sort of hollowed out House of Commons who don't hold the civil service to account, as a result of which the state has grown like a weed, and they're gradually preying on the private sector. So I actually think we've got a situation where now, in a democracy, the state should serve the people, and that goes through local government, national government, through every form of government. They're supposed to be taking care of those interests of people, such as national defence, such as policing, the important things that effectively allow human individuals to interface with each other. And as Adam Smith said, the rest of it takes care of itself. But the problem is government has now become the enemy of the people that it's supposed to serve. It is not doing what it should be doing. It is bloated. It is inefficient. And what it's doing is taxing the productive members of society and dishing it out to the unproductive members of society, and creating a dependency culture, which they hope will then vote for Labour. So I like high-minded, proud individuals who fight for what they've got, who are proud of their family, who basically contribute to their local community. And I think we are gradually seeing that break down, and sort of decent Middle England, as I call it, is pretty disillusioned about that happening. So I think that's why people didn't turn out at the last election. That's why Labour won the majority. They won actually on an incredibly low percentage of the vote. So in a way, that's good for reform, because we can see ourselves continuing to rise in the polls. And under first past the post, it is now, I think, a probability rather than a possibility that we could form the next government with an overall majority. And then we have the opportunity to make dramatic changes.
Absolutely, and I agree with you. And I have to say congratulations with topping the polls, because from something that perhaps Labour were not worried about, certainly now there's the feeling of terror that I see from what I see and read from Labour front. What would you say to those people that are watching that maybe haven't voted, maybe even never voted, never decided to vote, and seeing what's going on? I think a lot of people haven't voted because they're either not interested in voting or don't know who to vote for. What would you say to them to encourage them to vote? And the reason I ask the question is this, because a lot of people ask me, as a lawyer, one of the things people ask me is, well, why don't you do something about it? Why don't you change things? And what are you going to do to change it? And my answer is always, well, you need to vote for the party that will do the things you want to change. So what would you say to them to encourage them to vote?
Well, it's a very interesting question, Daniel, because some countries, as you know, have prescriptive voting, so you're required to vote. I'm not sure I agree with that. Being a libertarian, I think you've got to encourage people to turn out and vote. I profoundly disagree with postal voting unless it's absolutely necessary. So for me, that's the armed forces, and that's those people who are too ill to get to the polling booth. But if you believe, which I do, in one man or woman, one vote, then it is incumbent on those people to stir themselves, go to the booth, and actually put the cross in the box of those people who they think are going to govern them best. If they don't do that, then they have absolutely no right to bellyache about a poor performance by the state, because they clearly haven't bothered to take an interest in the way they're governed, and therefore they have to accept what they're given. But what I think is refreshing, and I think this answers your question, is we are seeing in reform more and more young people who've never voted before, and certainly probably didn't vote at the last election, who are, I think, taking a greater interest in what's happening in the country. And I think they're doing that, in my view, and I'm not a baby boomer. I'm arguably the tail end of the baby boom. I'm 67. I think the main body of the boomers was those who are probably now 70 to 75. So I'm, if you like, the waste starts to go in at my age, and hence the retirement age has been pushed up gently already. And by the way, that's going to continue because the state pension is a fraud. So I think young people can see the baby boomers who've had all the opportunity, they've made the money, they're living in the best streets or areas, they've got the nicest houses, they've got the pensions at 65. And the young people are working extremely hard. They don't have the same opportunity. They arguably don't have the same disposable income. And I think there's a sort of schism opening up between the generations. And I think what they see with reform is, if you see the incumbent structures not delivering for you, you have nothing to lose for voting for change. So I mean, to give you an example, yesterday on the tube, I mean, a young boy came up to me and said, "Are you Rupert?" I said, "Yes." He said, "You're doing a great job. I really appreciate it. I've never voted before. I'm going to be voting for reform in the next election." And that's happening everywhere, Daniel. So I think more and more people realize that they've got to vote. I'm not in favor of prescriptive voting, i.e. making it a legal requirement that everybody turns out and votes, which, as I say, does happen in some countries. But I think more and more people can see, and this is why reform is doing so well, they can actually see that things aren't happening correctly. And my 7 months in Parliament, I can confirm to those people who can see that now, Parliament is completely dysfunctional. The civil service is completely dysfunctional. And we need total change if we are to avoid basically descending into chaos. Now, what I can't tell anybody is, has it gone too far already? Because this has been going on for an awfully long time. I think the seeds of what I call evil and destruction have been laid very cleverly by a malign group of people who've attacked our education system. You've actually had then Tony Blair, Gordon Brown tried to create a dependency culture, as I said earlier. So this has happened, I think, not just by osmosis. This has sort of happened by design. And what we have to do is proactively dismantle everything that's been done and try and liberate the individual and let people find their own level. But, it's not going to be easy, Daniel. I think it's going to be very difficult, because the analogy I always use is somebody who's been on drugs for a long time. If you come off drugs, life is not very good for a while until you've sort of cleansed the system and you actually break free, and then you can, you get rid of the brain fog and you get rid of the dependency, and you actually then live, if you like, as a liberated individual. So I think that's what's happening, and I think therefore we will see higher turnouts, and higher turnout, I think, next time will work to our advantage, not to the advantage of what I call the parties that think they have the right to govern. We don't think we've got the right to govern. We hope we're given the chance to govern, and if we are given the chance, we need to change things. So we've still got a lot of work to do to put in place our policies, the structures, the plan. And you've probably seen what Donald Trump is doing in America. You know, he had one go when he wasn't ready to deal with things, and the second time round, he had 3,500 or 4,000 people ready to go, and they've hit the ground running. And you know, you've got people like Elon Musk, who is extremely intelligent. He's probably the greatest entrepreneur, well, certainly alive today and probably ever.
Mm-hmm.
And I think he can see how he can cut off a lot of the waste at the pass, and what's happening with US aid and what's happening with obviously these top-down payments that have been made, which clearly aren't in the interests of the American people. I think he's going to put the interests of the American taxpayer first. And if you do that, I think it'll surprise everybody by how quickly the results start to come through. So I'm actually very optimistic, and I think Donald Trump, Elon Musk, all those people in the US who are engineering change are going to show what can happen when you roll back statism and you release individualism. So that's what I think is exciting.
Absolutely. And just touching on the cutting back of waste, I was staggered to look at some of the figures that Elon Musk has been pulling out to save money with his Doge, Department of Government Efficiency, which seems to be working, and he seems to be cutting back on a lot of waste. And I can only imagine the waste that we have here as well, because it runs unchecked, I suppose, to a great extent, because those that know perhaps don't care, and those that care don't know. So I can only imagine the amount of waste there, and that I presume reform would look at as well.
You put it beautifully, because I think the civil service know but don't care. And I think the front bench ministers, none of whom have got very much business experience, don't know. And therefore, it doesn't feature on their radar. And some of the questions we're asking, when you look at the faces of the ministers, when we start to confront them with the information we've got, they don't answer all our questions. I suspect you're quite right. Compared with America, we probably waste far more as a percentage of our GDP than they do. But I think it's interesting that the front bench, in my view, are shocked by the figures that we're uncovering just by asking questions. So, yeah, you're right. The civil service do know, and they don't care. In fact, they're responsible for engineering the situation. They're responsible for, and again, it did come from America, the DEI nonsense, which you see me regaling against. As soon as we get elected, we will do exactly what Donald Trump's done and get rid of the whole lot of them, because not only are they not needed, they're actually a damn nuisance, and they permeate all the productive organs of society and create chaos. So, and once you've got them, their only job is to propagate more DEI and justify their own job. So I think, that came from America, that's ending in America, and I'm hopeful that what we're actually seeing is a seismic change now and a rebalancing towards the individual and away from the collective. As you know, life and countries tend to go from collectivism to individualism. You tend to find wars are brought about by collectivism, and after wars, people want peace and they want individualism. So I'm hopeful that we can peacefully engineer it. But as you know, there are a lot of things that are not as stable as they were in the world. I mean, China, I don't think economically is sound, nor do I think is the West sound. I think Europe's got huge problems. And as you know, when countries struggle, they often resort to military interventions, and that basically brings into play Taiwan. When the Falklands were invaded, it was largely down to Argentina's need to create a sort of nationalist fervor, which took people's attention away from the failings of what was happening within the country at the time. So I think we're in very dangerous times, and to be giving away the Chagos Islands unnecessarily just because of some abstruse sort of legal indicator rather than any form of legal requirement, is bonkers. But they just seem to be doing the most extraordinary things to almost every decision they make. To me, is nonsensical, and I think the British people can now see it. So I'm expecting the Tory vote to erode, but I also we're beginning to see, and I think we will continue to see the Labour vote evaporate. Interestingly, the Lib Dems and the Greens are sort of holding relatively stable. But I do you know what, Daniel? I think people want some refreshing common sense reality now. I think they've had enough of all the cant and the rubbish that's been peddled at them by an indolent sort of bloated state that's trying to justify its own existence. That's what I see at the moment.
That's precisely the impression I get when I read around and I read. I mean, when you get into media, people tell you, people bigger than me tell you, don't read the comments and things like that. I do read the comments, and good and bad alike. But it gives you a sense, and when you read on X and you read the conversations and responses, it gives you a sense. And I think people want a refreshing openness, candidness, and what you see is what you get, sort of thing, which is very much not, in my view, what we've had from Labour and a lot of the Conservatives over the years, and very, very stark contradictions.
Abject failure. You tell me what Boris did with an 80-seat majority that we gave him. I mean, I think he did less than nothing. I mean, I call it either diddly squat or absolute diddly squat. He didn't do anything with it.
And I think a lot of people share that view, and I think a lot of people are fed up with hearing one promise and it being broken, and especially when it's made so emphatically, with particularly regarding council tax, Keir Starmer, not a penny more, and yet obviously they're going up by up to 10%, and that was the case of them asking for 25% above. For those watching that aren't familiar with my previous video, over 5%, which is a 3% plus 2%, they cannot increase it without either a referendum of local constituents voting, yes, we would like our council tax to go up by more than 5%, which I can't see people voting for, or they go with their hand out for permission. And now 6 of those have got permission to do that, up to and including 10%.
They were a lot of them were speculating in the property market, and when interest rates went up, as usual, they all got caught, because most of them aren't. They don't speculate on their own account. They're only happy to speculate on with other people's money, as I call it. So, I mean, how can Eastleigh Borough Council be £500 million in debt? You tell me, Daniel. And all they then do is mutualise their incompetence across their tax-paying citizens, and I find that revolting. I really hate it. So, as you know, that's the problem with statism. There's no accountability. Everybody blames everybody else. It's a bit like a football team that loses. It's never my fault. It's always his fault.
Yeah.
And that's what you get with statism. Whereas if you've got principals running their own businesses, they first of all have an interest in looking after their staff, because you don't want to disrespect or treat your fellow staff badly. They are, after all, part of your team. So you tend to treat people better as a principle, and individuals treat each other better than states. I mean, you only have to look at totalitarian governments like the Nazi Germany, or indeed Stalin, or almost any other form of communist or collectivist body. You end up with abuse of their citizens, and that doesn't happen with. Hasn't happened here, because we have had a respect for the individual, and I think I was always brought up, as probably you were, that as long as people aren't damaging the interests of other people, they should be allowed to pursue whatever religion they want, whatever pastime they want, and they should be able to live their lives as they want to live them. It is not up to the state to impinge on that and tell them what they should or shouldn't be doing. But increasingly, it seems that misguided people want to foist their warped opinions on those people who just want to get on and live their lives. And it's not good, is it? It's pretty disappointing.
What I think is staggering is that ostensibly we have those with either a fundamental lack of experience or no experience whatsoever in things such as running a business or really running an economy, whether claiming to be an economist or otherwise, a fundamental lack of experience doing those things. And yet those are now in charge to do those things. And I think as you've been in business, I've been in business all my life, I can see very clearly what will work and what will not work. And I think it is staggering that those who, on the face of it, don't have that experience, don't have that expertise, are put in control to make those decisions. And then I think everybody will be wondering what happened afterwards. And
Well,
I think we'll
yes, I don't like the man, but he's written a very good book. Rory Stewart has written a book called Politics on the Edge. I don't know if you've read it, but as you were alluding to, the problem we've often got is that ministers are not qualified to be running the departments they're put in charge of. He writes this book to say, just as he was getting to understand his brief as prisons minister or whatever, he gets shuffled to another department. So all that happens then is the minister, who is supposed to hold the civil service to account, it moves to another department where he gets run around because he doesn't know his way around that other industry, having just got to know his brief in one industry and starting to hold people to account. He gets shuffled. And the other thing, which you're probably not going to like me saying, but I'm going to say it anyway, is I think the march of lawyers and regulators is damaging our society hugely. Obviously, we need laws and we need to all respect each other. But if you think our laws originated from the Ten Commandments, they have now morphed into something very complicated and very difficult. They have become, I think, a charter for lawyers to exploit what I call the productive economy, make themselves a living, give themselves importance. And I think the term I use is I think lawyers throughout history often become half a cut above themselves. And I think we're there now. So I think they need to have somebody come in and cut them off at the knees and reduce them to slightly less important part of our society, and then people, start to do deals on a handshake, and what happens is the market finds its own level because people do deals with people they trust, and it's a bit like early day banking. If you ran a bank, you spent your whole life building up confidence, and therefore people put their money with you. But the minute there was one whisper that you were not trustworthy, there was a run on your bank. You lost everything you'd built up over your life. So I do think there is a need to return to the principles of caveat emptor and basically human interface without the need for complex legal agreements. And, you only have to take one section, tax law. Our tax manual, I think, is now 21,500 pages. It's full of, loose ends. It's open to innumerable interpretation. And whilst Rachel Reeves might be humming one thing, HMRC are very definitely not singing the same song. So that's just one example, but it's throughout society, whether it's the regulators. So, as you know, the SA morphed into the F through the Financial Services Market Act of 2000, became the FCA and the PRA. They've killed our stock market. Again, fest for lawyers. I was in the city and we increasingly had this wretched, a bit like DEI, these wretched regulators sort of sprung up, and the lawyers created departments and they all made shed loads of money for basically talking nonsense. Rule books were written which meant nothing. And in the end, as I say, the caveat emptor got suppressed. And London is no longer the force it was as far as a financial centre goes. And I'm very concerned about the latest thing that's proposed is a football regulator. So the Premier League grew up into the most successful league in the world. It gives us huge soft power. It raises vast amounts of revenue for the government. And now they're proposing a football regulator. Well, none of these people were anywhere to be seen when the league was being built up, and light touch, sort of private sector common sense built it into what it is.
Yeah.
Now they all want a bit of it, and they'll do exactly the same to our Premier League as they've done to our financial markets and almost everything else they touch. And you can almost write the script, Daniel. You know,
Yeah.
you get the entrepreneur comes in, makes the money, lists his company, rafts of lawyers, huge sort of amounts of fees on listing, and then ultimately, you know, battery's low on this computer, so I don't know. Hope we don't drop out. But no, so there's a sort of repetitive theme. Lawyers come in, business fails, you know, people get unemployed, and then some other entrepreneur springs up somewhere else and takes all the risk and builds it up. But I mean, it's quite extraordinary, really. You probably see it yourself, but I mean, Alan Sugar used to outline it very well. He was, when I was chairman of Southampton, he was chairman of Tottenham, so I got to know him quite well. We had a few arguments about player transfers, but other than that, we got on reasonably well.
Well, on the couple of things out of that, on the lawyer thing, I think I'm somewhat unique in that. Well, actually, go right back to the beginning. When I was 16 and my school teachers said, pick a career, I said, well, I'd love to be a lawyer, a barrister. And they said, no, be realistic. You know, it's too competitive, too difficult. You'll never make it. And so actually, after university, I went into business instead. I came back to being a lawyer later. And sorry, you still there?
Yeah, I'm just trying to get some charge into this computer.
Yeah. So I came back to being a lawyer later, but
you've come up in lights now, Daniel. You were getting progressively darker, but you've now the lights come in. The lights come in
again. Halo. So now
no halo, no halo, no, but light.
No halo. But now having coming later to be a lawyer, having been through the business process, being the consumer, being the client, being a business operator, et cetera, and then becoming the lawyer, and then realizing actually quite how ridiculous a lot of the process, a lot of the procedures, a lot of the rules, and how cumbersome they are. In fact, there was, I'll try to find it, but there was a guide written, I think, by a few judges or maybe retired judges, of the guide for litigants in person, the simplified guide, and it was something like 170 pages long or something. So that just coins it, really, because the whole system is so unnecessarily complex. Even something as simple as a parking charge notice or a penalty charge notice, which are different, but something as simple as those, you have to go through the whole process. And I'll give you an example. I had, for one of my clients, I had to redraft their particulars of claim because they'd used the government's online portal for filing the thing. And the solicitors on the other side objected. And the judge agreed that the system had essentially spat out this long diatribe of what had happened, which was what the system had asked him to write. You know, tell us what happened. Tell us the chronology of what happened. And so he did that, and he filed it, and the solicitors objected. The judge agreed and ordered it to be redrafted, at which point he came to me. So I had to redraft this, and so it was essentially an amended particulars of claim. Might as well have been a new one because the thing didn't make sense. But the point was it wasn't accepted by either the solicitors on the other side, because they'll complain about anything, but not by the court either, and to be fair to the judge looked at it and it wouldn't have made sense. It didn't ask. What it would have been better doing was asking him for, what is the cause of action? What is it that you are asking the court to decide? What is your cause of action? Of course, it didn't do that. So the whole, and that is without knowing the law and the reams of materials that you would have to know to properly plead that. And yet, most law, I try to tell people, is common sense. Most law does make common sense. Not all of it, but some of it you have to read into the detail. But most of it should make common sense. And so, actually, I'm
definitely not all of it, Daniel. Some of it, maybe. I agree with that. I'll give you that, but I'm not giving you all of it. Yeah.
No, that's certainly not all of it. But so I'm the lawyer who will say that lawyers are not always necessary because, or they shouldn't always be necessary, because I don't think it's fair. I really don't. I mean, I can say this because I am financially free. I've been in business all my life. Yes, I'm a lawyer and I have an hourly rate, but I'm at the position I can say, well, yes, my hourly rate is what it is because I am qualified to do that and charge that. But I think it's unfair that lawyers are able to charge this amount to clients, because then it makes access to justice very difficult and very expensive. And I can say that because I am a lawyer and I'm in a unique
I didn't
position to be
come on
able.
to have a go at you, but I would sum up the position
Yeah,
by saying that lawyers get between the wall and the wallpaper. They are that's the
yeah.
analogy I would
And
use.
I didn't take any offense either, by the way. I don't do that, but I think that is an interesting point. I think that the rules, the regulations are such as they are these days, that it makes it very difficult to access for the vast majority of people. And I found it hilarious when this government went to regulators to ask for advice on how to grow the economy, and the response was to ease the regulations. I mean, what did they expect the response was
No,
going
no,
to
no,
be?
no, no. Rota Reeves calls it regulating for growth, Daniel. An oxymoron if ever there was one.
Indeed,
What you do is you deregulate for growth. You do not regulate for growth. So,
indeed.
I mean, the wretched woman hasn't got a clue, and she's never run a business. She lied about her CV. It's had more mutations than the AIDS virus, as I always say. So I look. I mean, these people are not honourable people, and they're in positions which they shouldn't be in. How long that goes on before the British people, go on some form of tax strike or decide they're not getting what they need, I don't know. But whoever voted Labour at the last election has made a very grave error, and arguably they could have put an arrow through the heart of Britain. So we're just going to have to see where it ends up, I think.
And do you think we are dangerously close to a tax strike? I mean, I made a bit of an
I
off
don't
comment.
know, but as you know, running businesses, we collect national insurance, we PAYE, pensions, VAT. So the
Mhm,
entire private sector is designed to collect tax for gift wrap it and send it to the state.
mhm.
So they have got an Achilles heel there, and if everybody decided they weren't going to send their tax, the state yet hasn't got the power to dive into your bank account and take it. Equally, I think people have got to demand accountability from government. Government demands accountability from you and I. The other thing that they've done, of course, is weaponize our advisors against us. So, as you know, your accountant is
Mhm.
now also a tax collector. So, whereas in the past his job was to mitigate your tax, his job arguably now is to make sure his own backside doesn't end up being slapped by the government, particularly the HMRC. And as I say, when the tax laws are open to such innumerable interpretation, that means you and I probably end up overpaying tax, certainly
Mhm.
on a moral basis, if not on an actual basis, because the default position of all advisors now is if they think there's a chance you should pay the tax, they advise you to pay it. Because if
Yeah.
they don't advise you to pay it and the revenue disagrees, they are the ones who are held to account, and they don't want that. So look, we live in a bizarre society now. Meanwhile, you and I in the private sector are working our backsides off, productively paying all this tax, and then the DWP is handing it out like confetti to parts of society that are not contributing to the tax take. They're
Mhm.
basically a dead weight on the back of the private sector. So, with the state heading for 50% of GDP, that is unsustainable. And, the state should be at the most 25%. It's too high in America, and I'm hoping that the Donald and Elon Musk will get it back to below 25% ere too long. But here we're on what I call a death spiral if we're not careful. And I think the next thing that happens is because when you raise all the taxes that she's raised and you basically start central planning like she's doing, there's no incentive for the private sector to invest. And if you're like me, you believe in investment. Long-term investment is
Mhm.
usually the driver for most economic growth.
Yeah.
That requires confidence. I can tell you at the moment there's no confidence in the country. So people are actually employing less people because she's put these taxes on employment, which is ridiculous. They are running for Monaco, for Dubai, for Greece, for Italy. So we're losing our most productive people. Those who are staying are drawing their horns in and hoping that they can see their life through to the removal of the Labour government whenever that happens, hopefully sooner rather than later. And they can then start to rebuild their fortunes. So what's happening is the hatches are being battened down, which means growth is going to be disappointing. The next step, and we'll see tomorrow, is they will probably start cutting interest rates, at which point I think we end up with, if we have no growth and we end up with interest rates falling, our next event is a massive sterling crisis. So sterling comes under pressure. I think it's hugely overvalued at the moment. And once sterling starts to collapse, then the entire dynamic of an economy which has basically been built on imports starts to reverse, and it is not a comfortable place to be. So that's where I think we're going. I mean, it may take a little bit longer. The economy has been propped up by this 400 billion of misdirected COVID largesse, which has been pumped in through bounce back loans, through Sybil's loans, and through all sorts of nonsense, which has enriched arguably those people who don't deserve to be enriched. But what it has done is it's given the entire economy vast amounts of what I call spare cash. Which is gradually being eroded. And once that finishes, I think sterling comes down, we have a problem. So I'm expecting a sterling crisis within a year. And then we'll start to see some pretty unpleasant things happening. That means higher long-term interest rates. That means, in the end, you can't keep cutting interest rates if your currency is under pressure, because all that happens is every time you cut the interest rate, the currency collapses again. So, as we're running deficits everywhere. We've got huge amounts of accumulated debt. We are basically running a welfare economy scam. And, how much longer can we go on doing that? I don't think it's going to last that much longer before reality exerts itself, which it always does in the end.
And this is all exacerbated, obviously, by immigration statistics. And I've got a point here to talk to you about statistics. You're obviously pushing very hard for those statistics from the Home Office, and they're not forthcoming. And what really gets me, you don't need to be a lawyer to get this, but even on a very superficial level, they say they don't keep the data centrally, but that doesn't expressly say they don't keep it anywhere else. And so obviously they do have this data. And then there was a report that said that it was too time consuming for police to take certain details, which of course it isn't. I mean, it's a code if they need to record it. So do you expect that they will eventually give you the data that you want?
We think they've got the data. If you look at the number of forms you and I have to fill in every day of our lives, we think they've got the data. But as I said to you earlier, I think when they look at the data that we've requested, it's probably so shocking that they couldn't possibly release it. So they say they haven't got it. Do we believe them? We don't. Do we believe anything that the state says? We don't. And should we ever believe anything the state says? Very definitely not. So I think at the end of the day, we must stop this illegal immigration, as you said earlier. Detain, deport. We're very public about that. I don't think that's in any way unreasonable. If you break the law, you or I, as a lot of those people broke the law with their social media posts, they're in prison. So if you come here illegally, you get detained and you get deported. And if you're a foreign criminal in our prison, you should be deported. We need to start cleaning our act up, and we need to start getting real about protecting the interests of the British people. And that's what hasn't been happening. So I find it very offensive when, our pensioners are asked to forfeit their winter fuel allowance to save a few quid. And I don't know what we're spending on illegal migrants, but it runs into the billions, Daniel. And if we only knew the truth, I think we'd all be pretty shocked. having promised not to raise APR on small businesses and farms. What have they done? The polar opposite, raised APR. They lied. They got people to vote for them. I mean, they're going to get eviscerated in the countryside now, Labour. They're going to get eviscerated in the red wall seats. They're going to get eviscerated down the coastal seats. I mean, they are doing their very best to make sure that they spectacularly lose the next election. So I watch really with horror what they're doing. What they've done, as I said earlier, to the schools, what they've done to the pensioners, what they've done to the farmers, what they've done to the small businesses. It's bizarre. And it's as if they want to break the backbone of Britain, and they then want to give it to people who are coming here illegally. I mean, it's quite extraordinary. What government or country has survived when it behaves like that? None, I don't think, for very long. And they don't deserve to. I'm going to have to go in a minute because we've got some more stuff to do. But it's been really great talking to you. And I mean, let's keep in touch. I'm hopefully, unless I block my copybook, I'm intending to be in Parliament for the foreseeable future. I've had one or two sort of scuds with people, which arguably could have ended badly. But no, I think let's keep in touch and let's keep talking. And if you think there's anything that we should be discussing, by all means, do make contact with us and tell us, and we'll proactively pursue it.
Will do. And that, of course, goes for everyone who's watching, and in the comment section, we can forward those messages on. I'm sure Rupert will be very interested to hear those views. So, Rupert, thank you for joining me. It's been my pleasure. And I'm sure everyone watching has been very grateful.
Top man, Daniel, and lovely to talk to you. Let's do it again.
Thank you very much.
Okay.
Take care.
All right. Bye-bye.